Mia's mornings began with the stark reality of her small, dimly lit apartment, the silence echoing the loneliness she felt since her mother's passing. A second-year college student studying business, she found herself increasingly weighed down by financial pressures and the daunting responsibilities that came with adult life without parental support. Her routine was a relentless cycle of classes and work, her social life a forgotten luxury tucked away amidst textbooks and timesheets. Each day, Mia donned her janitorial uniform, a stark contrast to her classmates' casual or business attire. Her job at a corporate building downtown paid the bills, but starkly reminded her of her struggles. The large, glossy floors and the sterile scent of cleaning chemicals were far removed from the vibrant campus life she glimpsed in brief, passing moments. As she pushed her cleaning cart through the hallways each evening, her reflection in the polished surfaces seemed to mock her with what could have been a different Mia, one who could have been just a student, not a janitor. Her interaction with others during her shifts was minimal. Occasionally, she exchanged brief, polite nods with late-working employees or shared an awkward elevator ride with executives who rarely saw past the uniform. These moments, while fleeting, underscored her isolation, deepening the chasm between her current state and her aspirations. One particularly grueling day, as she cleaned an executive's office after hours, Mia found herself pausing, her eyes landing on a framed photograph of a family skiing. It seemed so distant from her own life, filled with financial woes and loneliness. Shaking off a rising tide of envy and sadness, she continued her work, her movements mechanical, her mind elsewhere. "Long night, huh?" The sudden voice made her jump. It was Tom, one of the few friendly faces, a security guard who often worked the same late shift. "Yeah, just the usual," Mia replied, forcing a smile as she adjusted the trash bag she was replacing. "You know how it is?" Tom nodded, his expression sympathetic. "Don't work too hard, okay? Remember, you're more than this job," he said gently before continuing his rounds. His words, meant to be encouraging, lingered in Mia's mind as she finished her shift. They sparked a mix of appreciation and renewed awareness of her stark reality. The simplicity of the statement clashed with the complexity of her feelings, gratitude for the job that kept her financially afloat, and a resentful reminder of her unchosen responsibilities. Back in her apartment, Mia sat at a small desk cluttered with textbooks and bills, trying to focus on an assignment due the next day. The clock ticked loudly in the quiet room, each sound a reminder of the time slipping away, time she wished she could spend studying, resting, or just being a normal college student. Her phone buzzed, a message from a classmate asking about notes from the last lecture. As she replied, detailing the key points, she felt a brief connection to her life as a student, a role often overshadowed by her nightly janitorial uniform. It was a reminder of why she persisted, why she fought through the exhaustion and isolation. The late nights, the constant balancing act between work and study, the loneliness, it all coalesced into a life Mia hadn't chosen but had to navigate. Yet, despite the challenges, she was determined. Her education was the key to changing her narrative, to moving beyond the janitor's uniform and the shadows of corporate hallways. It was her path to a future where her reflections in glossy surfaces would show her not just as she was, but as she could be. This determination, hardened by necessity and fueled by the memory of her mother's strength and encouragement, was what kept her going. It was what made her set the alarm each night, face each morning, and push through each day. During her routine late-night cleaning shift, Mia maneuvered her cart along the quiet, well-lit corridors of the corporate building, a stark contrast to the bustling activity during the day. The sounds of her own movements, the hum of the overhead lights, and the occasional distant closing of a door were the usual background noise that accompanied her solitude. One particular evening, as Mia made her way towards the executive wing, a place she seldom cleaned until very late to avoid disturbing any lingering meetings, she overheard voices coming from one of the usually silent conference rooms. Curiosity piqued, she slowed her approach, her ears straining to catch snippets of the conversation. "Are you absolutely sure this will go unnoticed?" one voice asked, a deep tone that suggested a mixture of caution and intrigue. "The adjustments are subtle enough, By the time anyone notices, we'll have already secured the bonuses and moved on. Another voice responded, smooth and confident, the sound of papers shuffling in the background punctuating his assurance. Mia stopped, her hands tightening around the handle of her cleaning cart. Financial manipulations, bonuses. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of the words. Her courses in business ethics flashed through her mind, the warnings about corporate fraud and the responsibilities of reporting it swirling in conflict with her position as a janitor. She knew overhearing this was significant, but the implications were confusing. Should she intervene? Could she intervene without risking her job? Mia was well aware of her vulnerability in the company's hierarchy. The thought of bringing up such accusations against high-ranking executives seemed almost ludicrous, a surefire way to jeopardize her employment. Yet as she stood there, hidden by the shadow of a large potted plant, the gravity of the situation settled in. These weren't just abstract concepts from a classroom. They were real, potentially illegal activities that could affect real people. Her heart pounded with a mix of fear and a burgeoning sense of duty. Drawing a deep breath, Mia pushed her cart quietly past the door and decided to continue listening. In the coming nights, she made a point to subtly linger near the executive wing, hoping to catch more of the conversation that might shed light on the situation. A week later, her opportunity came. The same voices convened again, this time discussing timelines and specific numbers. Mia, pretending to dust nearby surfaces, listened intently. "We need to finalize the figures before the quarterly report goes out. Make sure everything looks legitimate, but keep our margins high," the smooth-voiced executive instructed. "Understood. I'll adjust the depreciation accounts and defer some of the maintenance expenses to next quarter to mask the discrepancies," the other replied, his tone now a mix of resignation and determination. Armed with more specifics, Mia felt the weight of what she had discovered growing heavier. She understood enough from her studies to know these were not just unethical practices, they were potentially criminal. Her initial confusion gave way to a resolute clarity. That night, back in her apartment, Mia sat at her small desk surrounded by her business textbooks, the notes from her ethics class open in front of her. She pondered her next steps. Reporting what she had overheard meant stepping into a fraught battle, one she was ill-equipped to handle alone. "Who would believe me?" she muttered to herself, the daunting image of the corporate hierarchy towering over her. Yet, the thought of staying silent, of allowing the deceit to continue unchecked, chafed against everything she believed in. Determined to not let the fear dictate her actions, Mia resolved to seek advice. She decided to contact her business ethics professor, a mentor who had always encouraged her to stand up for what was right, regardless of the cost. "Professor Jacobs, it's Mia. I need some advice about something serious. Something I overheard at work." She spoke into her phone later that evening, her voice steady but tinged with the nervous realization of the path she was about to take. Mia's decision to delve deeper into the dubious financial activities she overheard was not taken lightly. Night after night, as she pushed her cleaning cart through the hushed corridors of the corporate building, her mind raced with both the ethical implications of her discovery and the personal risk involved in probing further. Using her janitorial access as a guise, Mia began to meticulously plan her rounds to coincide with the schedules of the implicated executives. She paid close attention to the timing of their meetings, noting when they stayed late or gathered in hushed urgency. This strategic positioning allowed her to overhear additional fragments of conversations, each snippet adding to the troubling picture forming in her mind. One evening, as she was refilling soap dispensers in the executive washroom, she overheard one of the executives on a call. "Make sure those numbers are adjusted before the next audit cycle. It's critical we keep this under wraps," he said, his voice low but laced with authority. Mia stood silently, her presence unnoticed, as the executive continued, "Yes, push the bigger discrepancies into the less scrutinized accounts. It's only for this quarter." These words confirmed Mia's worst suspicions. The manipulation was ongoing and systematically planned. Realizing the gravity of what she was uncovering, Mia wrestled with her conscience. She knew the right thing to do was to expose this fraud, but she also understood the precariousness of her position as a low-level employee. The fear of retaliation was palpable. Losing her job was a real threat, not to mention the potential for legal repercussions against her if her accusations were not taken seriously. Despite these fears, Mia's resolve strengthened. She began to take discreet notes, jotting down dates, times, and bits of overheard dialogue on a small notepad she kept hidden in her janitor's cart. Each piece of evidence was carefully recorded, her handwriting tiny and precise. One night, while emptying the trash bins in a rarely used conference room, Mia found discarded printouts that seemed to be rough drafts of financial reports. They were marked with corrections and notes in the margins that suggested manipulation of figures. Realizing the importance of these documents, she quickly used her phone to take photos of the most incriminating pages before replacing them exactly as she had found them. At home, Mia organized her gathered evidence, creating a timeline of the fraudulent activities. Her apartment, once a place of solitude and rest, now resembled a small investigation office, with papers and notes spread across her dining table. Feeling the weight of her findings, Mia decided it was time to seek help. She contacted her ethics professor again, her voice tense as she explained what she had found. "Professor Jacobs, I've gathered more information. It's worse than I thought. I have evidence, photos, notes, everything," Mia confided over the phone, her fingers nervously twisting the cord. Her professor's response was calm but urgent. "Mia, you need to be extremely careful. This is sensitive information and you're in a vulnerable position. We need to discuss the best way to proceed without putting you at further risk." They arranged to meet in a quiet corner of a local cafe the following day, away from any possible prying eyes. As Mia prepared for the meeting, she felt a mix of fear and determination. She was about to step into a battle much larger than anything she had anticipated when she first overheard those fateful words. Yet she knew there was no turning back now. Mia sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by scattered documents, her laptop open with multiple tabs of spreadsheets and financial reports. It was late into the night, and the only light came from the harsh glare of the bulb above her and the blue hue of her computer screen. As she pieced together the evidence she had meticulously gathered over the past weeks, a chilling picture began to form. Each document, each overheard conversation, and every discreet photo she had taken of the suspicious financial reports added another layer of deceit to the scheme she was uncovering. It was not just a matter of creative accounting or aggressive financial strategies. It was outright fraud, designed to manipulate earnings and deceive investors. Mia leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples as she tried to process the magnitude of the deceit. The company's executives were inflating profit margins and shifting losses to obscure subsidiaries, all to maintain the illusion of robust financial health. The impact on small investors, people like her mother who had trusted such companies with their hard-earned money, would be devastating. Her thoughts turned to her mother, who had scrimped and saved, investing in stocks that she believed would secure her future. The memory of her mother's cautious optimism about her modest investments was stark against the reality Mia faced now. The betrayal felt personal, and her resolve to bring the truth to light grew stronger. Mia continued to sort through her evidence, organizing it into a coherent timeline that showed not just isolated incidents, but a continuous, systematic effort to defraud. She annotated the documents with her own notes, highlighting discrepancies and linking them back to specific conversations she had overheard. At one point, she paused, looking at a particularly damning email she had found discarded in a trash bin, printed out and forgotten. The email discussed adjusting the asset valuations ahead of the quarterly report. Mia remembered the night she had retrieved it, the rush of adrenaline as she realized what it was. She had photographed it meticulously, ensuring even the faintest marks were visible. The next day, Mia met with her professor, Professor Jacobs, in a quiet cafe. She brought a condensed version of her findings, organized in a binder. As she laid out the documents in front of him, her hands trembled slightly, not just from nervousness, but from the weight of responsibility. "This is everything," Mia said, her voice steady despite her anxiety. "It's all here. Emails, internal memos, financial adjustments. It's systemic and it's ongoing." Professor Jacobs, who had been listening intently, nodded gravely. "Mia, this is significant. You've done an incredible job gathering this, but it's also extremely sensitive. You're talking about accusing senior executives of serious financial fraud. We need to think about the next steps very carefully." Mia looked at him, her expression resolute. "I know the risks, Professor, but think about the investors. This isn't just numbers on a page, it's people's lives, their futures. Like my mom's, we have to do something." The conversation that followed was a mix of strategic planning and ethical considerations. Professor Jacobs agreed to help Mia contact a trusted journalist who specialized in investigative reporting on corporate misconduct. Together, they discussed how to present the information to ensure it was taken seriously and to protect Mia from potential backlash. As Mia left the cafe that afternoon, her binder of evidence tucked safely under her arm, she felt a mix of fear and determination. She was about to expose a fraud that could shake the company to its core. The path ahead was fraught with challenges, but Mia knew that her actions could prevent others from suffering the fate her mother had, trusting in a system that was rigged against them. Mia found herself in a quiet corner of the university library, her notes spread out before her. She had always considered this spot her refuge, a place where she could immerse herself in study and momentarily escape her other responsibilities. Today, however, the tranquility of the library contrasted sharply with the storm of anxieties whirling inside her. She was faced with a formidable decision: to expose the financial fraud she had uncovered at her workplace, or to remain silent to protect her job and personal safety. Each option carried significant consequences, and as she pondered, the weight of this decision seemed to compress the very air around her. Mia's thoughts raced as she considered her position as a janitor, a role that provided essential financial support but also made her vulnerable. Exposing the fraud could lead to immediate dismissal, and given the power of the executives involved, there might be further repercussions that could jeopardize her future career and well-being. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her phone to call Professor Jacobs, needing his counsel more than ever. "Professor, I'm really torn," Mia confessed as soon as he answered. "I know what's right, but I'm afraid of what it might cost me." Professor Jacobs' voice was calm and reassuring, a stark contrast to Mia's tense whisper. "Mia, it's normal to feel scared. What you're considering is brave and fraught with risks. But remember, integrity often demands courage in the face of fear. You're not just fighting for yourself, but for every small investor who stands to lose from this deception." His words resonated with Mia, grounding her swirling thoughts. She knew he was right. Her own mother had been a small investor, her hopes dashed by similar unscrupulous actions. "Thank you, Professor. I just need to think about how to do this safely," Mia replied, her voice a mixture of determination and apprehension. Later that evening, as Mia sat in her apartment, she mulled over her options. The safety of anonymity was tempting, perhaps providing a tip to a financial regulatory agency or anonymously leaking the information to the media. Yet a more direct approach might have a greater impact, ensuring the fraud was taken seriously and acted upon swiftly. Her decision crystallized during a restless night. Mia resolved to not only share her findings, but to do so in a manner that would uphold her responsibility to the truth and to those affected. She decided to compile a detailed report and deliver it to both a trusted investigative journalist and a regulatory body. The following day, Mia meticulously organized her evidence, corroborating financial records with the incriminating conversation she had overheard. Each piece of evidence was a testament to her thoroughness and her commitment to exposing the truth. As she prepared her final report, Mia felt a surge of empowerment. This was more than just exposing a fraud. It was a stand against a system that she believed had failed her mother and countless others. It was a fight for justice. "I'm doing this. No matter what happens, I'm doing this," Mia whispered to herself, a quiet declaration in the solitude of her room. She attached her name to the report, eschewing anonymity for the accountability she hoped it would bring. With the report complete, Mia contacted the journalist and arranged a meeting. "I'll bring everything I have. It's time this came to light," she stated firmly during the phone call. As Mia prepared for the repercussions of her actions, she felt a mix of fear and resolve. The road ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, but she was ready to face it, fortified by her sense of justice and her commitment to doing what was right. Mia's resolve to expose the fraud at her workplace was firm, but as she planned the steps to deliver her evidence to a trusted journalist, her anxiety was palpable. The stakes were high, and the need for caution was paramount. She knew the potential repercussions of her actions, not just for her, but also for the integrity of the information she was about to disclose. Carefully, Mia selected a journalist known for handling sensitive matters with discretion and integrity. Ellen Page, a reporter for a major newspaper with a solid track record of investigative journalism, was her choice. Mia had followed Ellen's work and trusted her commitment to uncovering the truth without sensationalism. Mia reached out to Ellen via a secure email service, drafting her message several times before sending it. She introduced herself as a source with significant evidence of financial fraud at a major corporation, offering a brief description of the evidence without revealing too many details online. "Miss Page, I have substantial evidence that points to a pattern of financial fraud at my workplace. This involves senior executives and has severe implications for small investors. I'm ready to share this information, provided that we can ensure the confidentiality of our communications," Mia wrote. Ellen responded quickly, her reply marked by the professional caution of an experienced journalist. "Thank you for reaching out. I understand the sensitivity of the situation. Let's arrange a face-to-face meeting in a secure location. Please bring any documents or evidence you have." They agreed to meet at a small nondescript cafe that was frequented by a diverse crowd, making it less likely for Mia to be recognized. Mia prepared for the meeting with meticulous care, organizing her evidence into a coherent package. She made digital copies of all documents, stored securely on a USB drive, and kept the original papers in a locked briefcase. On the day of the meeting, Mia took several indirect routes to the cafe, constantly watching for any sign of being followed. Her heart raced with every step, not just from the physical exertion, but also from the weight of what she was about to do. As she entered the cafe, Mia scanned the room before spotting Ellen sitting in a secluded corner. The journalist acknowledged her with a nod, her expression serious. After ordering coffee, Mia and Ellen got straight to the point. "Here is everything I have," Mia said, sliding the briefcase across the table. She explained the contents methodically: financial reports, internal emails, and her detailed notes on the discrepancies and conversations she had overheard. Ellen listened intently, taking notes as Mia spoke. "This is substantial," Ellen murmured, flipping through some of the documents. "I'll need to verify all this with our legal team and see how we can best proceed with publication to ensure the maximum impact and your protection." The meeting concluded with Ellen assuring Mia that she would handle the information with the utmost care. "We'll be in touch very soon. Expect a call from me. We'll make sure to get this story out safely and effectively," Ellen assured her. Leaving the cafe, Mia felt a tumultuous mix of relief and suspense. She had done her part, yet now she had to wait and see the repercussions of her actions unfold. It was out of her hands, but the anxiety of waiting and wondering about the impact of her revelations lingered. Mia returned home to a restless evening. She tried to distract herself with studies and mundane tasks, but her mind kept drifting back to the cafe meeting. Had she done enough? How would the company react once the story was published? These questions haunted her, but deep down, she knew she had made the right decision. When the story broke early one Monday morning, it hit the media with the force of a storm. Headlines blared from every major news outlet, and Mia's carefully gathered evidence painted a damning picture of systemic fraud at a well-known corporate giant. The articles detailed the intricate schemes concocted by the executives to mislead investors and inflate earnings, all supported by Mia's documentation and testimony. At first, Mia watched the unfolding chaos from the shadows of her small apartment, her identity as the whistleblower still shielded by the journalist's promise of confidentiality. However, as the story gained traction, it wasn't long before her role began to emerge. Details of a young, brave janitor who had risked everything to expose the truth started to surface, and soon her identity was no longer a secret. Mia's initial relief at seeing justice begin to manifest was quickly overshadowed by a growing sense of vulnerability. Reporters began seeking her out, eager to get a personal account from the young woman who had single-handedly brought a corporate behemoth to its knees. Her phone buzzed incessantly, her email filled with interview requests and messages ranging from supportive to outright invasive. As she navigated this new reality, Mia felt the weight of her newfound visibility. She was not prepared for the spotlight, nor for the scrutiny that came with it. One afternoon, as she returned home from class, she found a group of reporters waiting outside her apartment. The sight of microphones and cameras thrust in her direction as she approached made her heart race. "Mia, can you tell us what motivated you to take such a big risk?" one reporter asked, shoving a recorder closer. "Were you aware of the consequences when you decided to expose the fraud?" Another chimed in. Mia, overwhelmed and unprepared for such an onslaught, retreated without answering. She hurried inside, her hands shaking as she closed the door behind her. The safe haven of her apartment felt suddenly fragile, the walls too thin against the world outside. That evening, Mia sat on the edge of her bed, her mind a whirlwind of anxiety. The public's reaction was largely supportive, her actions hailed as heroic by many, but the exposure brought with it a palpable sense of risk. She worried about retaliation from those she had exposed, about the potential legal ramifications, and about how this newfound fame might impact her future. The phone rang, piercing her thoughts. It was Professor Jacobs, checking in after seeing the day's events unfold. "Mia, how are you holding up?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "It's a lot, Professor," Mia admitted, her voice faltering. "I knew it would be big, but I didn't expect all of this. It's overwhelming. Listen, Mia, you did something incredibly brave, and it's natural to feel overwhelmed. But remember, you're not alone in this. You've done the right thing, and there are many who stand behind you," Professor Jacobs reassured her, his words a balm to her frayed nerves. Mia took a deep breath, drawing strength from his support. "Thank you, Professor. That means a lot to me." In the days that followed, Mia began to take cautious steps to reclaim her sense of control. She agreed to a few carefully selected interviews, each time emphasizing the importance of corporate accountability and the protection of investors. With each appearance, her confidence grew, as did her resolve to use her voice to effect change. Though the journey was fraught with challenges, Mia was learning to navigate her new role not just as a whistleblower, but as an advocate for transparency and ethics in business. The initial shock had given way to a steady determination to turn her ordeal into an opportunity for advocacy and education. As the repercussions of Mia's whistleblowing unfolded, she began to feel the chilling effects of her decision. While the public's reaction was overwhelmingly supportive, there were other, more sinister responses that emerged from the shadows. Unnamed corporate figures, whose interests had been severely jeopardized by the exposure, started to exert a quiet but unmistakable pressure. It began subtly: strange cars parked near her apartment at odd hours, hang-up calls late at night, and anonymous emails warning her to be cautious. These occurrences soon escalated into more direct threats, leaving Mia to wrestle with a constant undercurrent of fear. One evening, Mia returned home to find a plain envelope slid under her door. Inside, there was a single piece of paper with the typed message, "Be careful what you stir up. Not everyone likes the truth." The message was clear, and its implications terrifying. Mia's hands trembled as she read and reread the note, the words etching a deep chill into her spine. Feeling vulnerable and exposed, Mia installed extra locks on her doors and began varying her routes to and from campus. She also reached out to Professor Jacobs, seeking advice on how to handle the threats. "Professor, I'm scared," she confessed during one of their phone conversations, her voice strained with the stress she was enduring. "Someone's sending me threats. I don't know if I'm just being paranoid, but I feel like I'm being watched." "Mia, you need to take this very seriously," Professor Jacobs responded gravely. "I'm going to help you get in touch with the police so you can report these threats. It's important to make this official, to have a record of what's happening." With the professor's assistance, Mia filed a report with the local police, who advised her to keep a log of any suspicious activities and ensured regular patrols in her neighborhood. Despite these precautions, the sense of isolation deepened. Friends and acquaintances began to keep their distance, wary of being associated with someone who had drawn such powerful adversaries. This isolation took a toll on Mia's emotional well-being. Nights were the hardest. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow a potential threat. Her academic performance began to suffer as she struggled to concentrate, her thoughts constantly darting to who might be lurking around the corner. During one particularly difficult night, Mia reached out to Ellen, the journalist who had helped her expose the fraud. "Ellen, how do you deal with this? The fear, the threats?" she asked, seeking not just practical advice but also reassurance from someone who understood the dangers of confronting powerful entities. "It's not easy, Mia, but you find strength in the truth and in knowing you've done the right thing," Ellen replied, her voice steady and reassuring. "And remember, you're not alone. You have allies, and we're all here to support you." Gradually, Mia found small ways to cope with her anxiety. She took up running, which helped to clear her mind and relieve stress. She also began attending a support group for whistleblowers, where she met others who had gone through similar experiences. Their stories and support provided a measure of comfort and a reminder that she wasn't facing this battle alone. Despite the ongoing threats and the emotional toll they exacted, Mia remained resolute. She knew that the path she had chosen was fraught with risks, but it was also the path toward integrity and justice. Each step forward was a reaffirmation of her commitment to stand against corruption, no matter the personal cost. Several months after Mia's initial revelations, the legal ramifications for the executives involved in the fraud began to materialize. Investigations led by financial regulatory authorities culminated in a series of arrests and public trials that captured media attention nationwide. The evidence Mia had provided proved crucial, underpinning much of the case against the accused executives. Sitting in the back of the courtroom, Mia watched as the legal process unfolded. She saw the once confident executives, now diminished and anxious, as they faced the consequences of their actions. The judge delivered harsh sentences, reflecting the severity of the fraud and the betrayal of trust it entailed. Each sentence served was a vindication of Mia's efforts and a public affirmation that justice, though sometimes slow, was achievable. Mia felt a profound sense of relief as she left the courthouse. The burden of proof had been heavy, but she had carried it, driven by a belief in right and wrong that her mother had instilled in her from a young age. As she stepped out into the fresh air, she allowed herself a moment to appreciate the gravity of what she had accomplished. The knowledge that her actions had prevented further deceit and protected countless small investors filled her with a quiet pride. However, her satisfaction was tempered by a lingering worry about her future. The exposure of the fraud had made her a public figure, admired by many, but also a potential target for those who resented her role in the downfall of powerful figures. Mia knew that her life could not simply return to how it was before. The experience had altered her trajectory irrevocably, both professionally and personally. Later that week, Mia met with Professor Jacobs, who had been her steadfast supporter throughout the ordeal. They sat in his cluttered university office, surrounded by stacks of books and papers. "You've done something remarkable, Mia," Professor Jacobs said, his voice earnest. "But I know it's not without cost. How are you feeling about everything now?" Mia paused, considering her words. "I'm relieved it's over, and I'm proud of what I've done. But I'm also anxious about what comes next. I feel like I'm at a crossroads, and every path looks uncertain," she confessed. Professor Jacobs nodded understandingly. "It's natural to feel that way after what you've been through. But remember, you've shown incredible resilience and integrity. Those qualities will guide you forward, whatever you choose to do." Their conversation turned to her future, discussing potential career paths and opportunities. Mia was keenly aware that her experience had given her a unique perspective on corporate ethics and accountability. Professor Jacobs encouraged her to consider roles that could leverage her knowledge and experience, perhaps in regulatory bodies or as part of ethics oversight committees. As Mia left the office, she felt reassured, but aware that the road ahead would require the same determination and courage she had shown so far. The landscape of her life had changed, and she would need to navigate it with care. But she was not without direction. The values that had guided her actions were still her compass, and she was resolved to continue making a difference, advocating for transparency and justice in whatever form that might take. With these thoughts, Mia stepped back into her daily life, ready to face the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead, fortified by the knowledge that she had acted according to her conscience and had made a real impact. Several months after the trial and the hectic flurry of media attention, Mia found herself in a quiet corner of the university library, much like she had before the whole ordeal began. But now, the weight of her actions and their outcomes filled the air around her, mixing with the musty scent of old books and the quiet rustle of turning pages. She was no longer just a student. She was someone who had taken a stand, made a difference, and was now navigating a life transformed by her courage. As she sat studying for her finals, Mia reflected on the journey she had undergone. She thought about the risks, the sleepless nights filled with worry, and the overwhelming support that had buoyed her when she felt most alone. It had been a harrowing experience, but also a profoundly empowering one. She had exposed a truth that needed to be seen, and in doing so had learned a lot about the world and herself. "I never knew how strong I was until being strong was the only choice I had," Mia muttered to herself, paraphrasing a sentiment she felt deeply connected to. This reflection was interrupted by her friend Lisa, who approached with a gentle smile. "Hey Mia, how are you holding up? Ready for the finals?" Lisa asked, placing her books down on the table. Mia smiled, appreciating the normalcy of the question. "Yeah, getting there. It's been a lot, but I'm feeling ready to close this chapter and start the next." Lisa nodded understandingly. "What you did was amazing, Mia. You're like a hero to a lot of us here." Mia felt a flush of pride, but quickly tempered it with humility. "Thanks, Lisa. It doesn't really feel that way. I just did what I felt was right. It's important to stand up for what you believe in, even if it's tough." Their conversation shifted to plans for after graduation. Mia shared her aspirations, which had been shaped by her recent experiences. "I'm thinking about going into regulatory work or maybe law," Mia explained. "This experience has shown me how much impact those fields can have, and I think I could make a real difference." Lisa listened intently, her eyes bright with admiration. "With your determination, I have no doubt you'll do great things, Mia." As the semester drew to a close, Mia continued to balance her studies with her newfound role as a speaker on ethics and accountability. She was invited to panels and discussions where she shared her story and the importance of integrity in business. Each engagement strengthened her resolve and her belief in the impact one person could make. Looking forward, Mia was optimistic. She planned to finish her degree with the same dedication with which she had tackled the corruption at her workplace. Beyond that, her future seemed filled with possibilities. She envisioned herself working to ensure that other corporations acted ethically, protecting the interests of the public and preventing the kind of fraud she had uncovered. In quiet moments alone, Mia often reflected on the power of individual integrity. She had learned that one voice could echo far beyond the walls within which it first spoke, that truth had a power all its own, and that standing for what was right was sometimes a difficult, but always a rewarding path. As Mia prepared for her final exams, she felt a profound connection to her past self, the young woman who had nervously listened outside a conference room, not knowing the journey she was about to embark upon. She was grateful for her own strength and for the support of those who had helped her along the way. Mia was ready to move forward, her integrity intact, her spirit undeterred, and her life forever changed.
Black delivery girl solves the problem that 20 engineers failed to solve. If you're so smart, solve it now. They were in shock. If you're as smart as you think you are, then fix it now, yelled Michael Harrison, TechCorp's chief technology officer, pointing to the red screens flashing throughout the control center. The system had crashed completely 3 hours ago, paralyzing operations for dozens of client companies. Keisha Williams, only 24 years old, was there just to deliver the lunch Michael had ordered through the app. Her thermal backpack was still slung over her shoulder when she dared to comment on the error code she saw on the main screen. A comment that made all the engineers stop working and look at her as if she had spoken in an alien language. "Sorry, but that error is caused by a cache memory conflict," she said simply as she placed the order on the table. "You tried to reboot the primary server without clearing the pending transaction buffer." The silence that followed was deafening. 20 engineers from top universities, some with six-figure salaries, were confronted by a black food delivery girl who had identified in seconds what they had been unable to solve in hours. "Very funny," Michael laughed sarcastically, his voice dripping with condescension. "I bet you didn't even finish high school. How about you go back to your deliveries and leave the real work to those who understand it?" The other engineers chuckled, some shaking their heads in disdain. David Park, the senior engineer, crossed his arms and said, "Girl, this isn't like fixing a broken microwave. This is an infrastructure system that moves millions of dollars." Keisha stood motionless, her brown eyes maintaining a calmness that contrasted sharply with the chaos around her. There was something in that look, an almost dangerous serenity that suggested she knew something they didn't. "All right," she replied in a soft voice, adjusting the strap of her backpack. "But when you find out that I'm right and the system is back up and running in exactly 2 minutes after you follow my suggestion, remember this moment." Michael let out a loud, exaggerated laugh. 2 minutes? Honey, that system has been down for 3 hours. We have a team of 20 experts trying to fix it. You really think a food delivery girl is going to teach us something? Keisha smiled slightly, a smile that didn't reach her eyes but carried a weight that made some of those present feel inexplicably uncomfortable. It was as if she was keeping a secret too powerful to be revealed before the time was right. If this story of prejudice and underestimation touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple lunch delivery would become the catalyst for a revolution that no one would ever forget. Michael Harrison couldn't get that moment out of his head. 3 days had passed since the black delivery woman had dared to correct him in front of his entire team. And worst of all, she was right. The system had returned to normal exactly 2 minutes after they followed her suggestion. But Michael wasn't the kind of man who would allow himself to be humiliated by someone he considered inferior. With a degree from MIT, 15 years of experience in technology, and a salary of $200,000 a year, he simply couldn't accept that a simple food delivery girl knew something he didn't. "I got her name," said David Park, entering Michael's office with a mischievous smile. "Keisha Williams. 24 years old. Works for 3 different delivery apps. Lives on the east side of town. And here's the interesting part." David paused dramatically. "She dropped out of college in her 3rd year of a computer science degree." Michael raised his eyebrows, interested. "Dropped out? Why?" "Apparently, she couldn't pay her tuition. Low-income family, unable to afford her education. Typical case of someone who dreams too big and doesn't have the structure to support her dreams." What Michael didn't know was that Keisha had been forced to drop out of college not because of a lack of ability, but because of a family tragedy. Her mother had been diagnosed with cancer in her 3rd year of college, and Keisha had to choose between continuing her studies or working to pay for medical treatment. The choice was obvious. For 2 years, she worked 3 different jobs during the day and studied programming on her own during the early hours of the morning. Her desk was a cardboard box in the room she shared with her mother, and her computer lab was a used laptop she had bought with borrowed money. "You know what bothers me?" Michael continued, turning his chair to look out the 23rd floor window. "People like her think they can come into our world and talk to us as equals. She doesn't understand that there's a hierarchy, a natural order of things." David laughed, sharing the same mindset. "Exactly. I bet she memorized a few lines of code on the internet and now thinks she's an expert. Beginner's luck, nothing more." What they didn't know was that Keisha had developed, on her own at home, a route optimization system for delivery drivers that was more efficient than anything TechCorp had created. She had turned her need to survive into a learning opportunity, creating algorithms that maximized her earnings and minimized her work time. The following Thursday, Michael decided it was time to put the cocky delivery girl in her place. He called every delivery app in the city and used his influence as a corporate customer to make a special request. He wanted Keisha Williams banned from making deliveries to TechCorp. Allegations of inappropriate behavior and disrespect toward customers. He lied to the supervisors. As the chief technology officer of one of the largest companies in the city, I cannot allow disrespectful employees to continue providing services here. In less than 24 hours, Keisha received 3 notifications. Her account had been suspended on the 3 apps she used for work. No detailed explanation, no right to defend herself, no source of income. Sitting in her kitchen, staring at her mother's medical bills piled on the table, Keisha felt a mixture of anger and determination she hadn't experienced in a long time. Her hands trembled slightly as she reread the suspension messages, but it wasn't fear that caused the tremor. "Honey, what's wrong?" asked her mother, Helen, entering the kitchen with difficulty, still recovering from her latest chemotherapy session. "Nothing, Mom. Just a problem at work. I'll take care of it." Keisha hugged Helen gently, feeling the fragility of the body that had fought so hard to stay alive. "I'll fix everything." That night, Keisha turned on her old laptop and started doing something she hadn't done in a long time. She started coding. But this time, it wasn't to optimize delivery routes or solve simple logic problems. This time, she was building something much more ambitious. Every line of code she wrote was fueled by years of humiliation, of looks of contempt, of doors slammed in her face. Michael Harrison had just awakened something in her that he could never have imagined. The silent fury of someone who had been underestimated her entire life and had finally decided to prove her worth. For a moment, when she read the suspension messages, Keisha had hung her head and felt the familiar weight of injustice. But anyone who knew her true story would have known that she was just gathering strength, like a storm that forms silently before unleashing its full power. Keisha spent the next 2 weeks living a double reality. During the day, she desperately searched for new jobs, cleaning, waitressing, anything that would pay her mother's medical bills. At night, she transformed into someone completely different, a determined programmer building something that would change everything. What Michael Harrison didn't know was that his attempt to destroy Keisha's life had created the perfect fuel for something much bigger. Every no she received in job interviews, every pitying look from employers, every unpaid bill became another line of code in the system she was developing. "Honey, you've hardly slept," Helen said, watching Keisha typing frantically at 3 in the morning. "What project is that?" "Something that will change our lives, Mom. Trust me." At TechCorp, Michael was celebrating his victory over the inconvenient delivery girl. During a meeting with his team, he couldn't resist telling the story as if it were a funny anecdote. "Remember that girl who dared to correct us last week?" Michael laughed, leaning on the conference table. "Well, let's just say she won't be bothering us anymore. I used my contacts to make sure she's blacklisted from every delivery app in the city." David Park roared with laughter. "Perfect. She needs to learn that there's a natural hierarchy. People like us don't take insults from people like her." What they didn't know was that Jennifer Chun, a senior Asian programmer on the team, was discreetly recording the conversation on her phone. Jennifer had been the only one to defend Keisha on that fateful day, but she had been quickly silenced by her colleagues. Now, hearing Michael openly admit to ruining an innocent person's life, she felt she had to act. That same night, Jennifer did something that could cost her her job. She tracked Keisha down through social media and sent her a private message. "Hi, Keisha. I'm Jennifer. I work at TechCorp. I was there the day you solved our system problem. I need to tell you some things about what Michael did to you. Can we talk?" When Keisha received the message, she initially hesitated. It could be a trap. But something in the sincerity of Jennifer's words made her agree to meet her at a discreet coffee shop in the city center. "He really did that?" Keisha asked incredulously after listening to the recording of the meeting where Michael admitted to sabotaging her career. "Worse. He's bragging about it," Jennifer replied, her eyes flashing with indignation. "Michael Harrison is a narcissist who can't stand being corrected by anyone, especially a black woman. He did it out of pure wounded ego." Jennifer slid a piece of paper across the table. "These are the contact details for all of TechCorp's major corporate clients. Companies that rely on our systems for critical operations. If someone could prove that Michael is making decisions based on personal bias rather than technical competence." Keisha took the paper with trembling hands. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. Because I've been where you are, Jennifer sighed. 3 years ago, Michael tried to fire me after I corrected a mistake he made in an investor presentation. The only difference is that I had union protection and a lawyer. You didn't have that luck, but maybe we can create our own justice. That night, Keisha worked with renewed energy. Now she wasn't just building a system, she was building a trap. Her project had evolved into something much more ambitious, a security vulnerability analysis platform that could scan any corporate system and identify critical flaws in real time. But the real genius lay in what she had discovered during her sleepless nights of research. TechCorp had dozens of critical vulnerabilities in its own systems. Flaws that Michael and his team of 20 engineers had failed to detect, but which she had mapped out completely. Over the next week, Keisha began implementing the first phase of her plan. Using information Jennifer had provided, she created fake social media profiles and began connecting with CTOs and chief technology officers at TechCorp's top client companies. Her strategy was elegant in its simplicity. She offered free security audits to companies that relied on outsourced systems. Nothing illegal, nothing unethical, just a talented young woman offering her services to identify vulnerabilities that could put companies at risk. What these companies didn't know was that many of the vulnerabilities Keisha would find in their systems came directly from flaws in the products and services provided by TechCorp. "How's the project going?" Helen asked one evening, watching her daughter finally relax after 2 weeks of intense work. "Better than I expected, Mom. Much better." Keisha smiled, but there was something different about that smile. It was no longer the expression of a desperate young woman trying to survive. It was the smile of someone who had found her true strength. At that same moment, across town, Michael Harrison received the first of many phone calls that would change his life forever. The CTO of Megacorp, one of TechCorp's largest clients, was on the line. "Michael, we need to talk urgently. We've received an independent security report that shows critical flaws in all the systems you implemented for us. Flaws that you assured us didn't exist." Michael felt a chill run down his spine. "There must be some mistake, Mr. Rodriguez. Our systems have passed every check." The report is from a security expert named Kay Williams. "Do you know her?" The phone almost slipped out of Michael's hand. Kay Williams. Keisha Williams. The delivery girl he had destroyed was back, and apparently, she wasn't delivering food anymore. "Michael? Are you still there?" Yes. I'll look into it right away." When Michael hung up the phone, his hands were shaking slightly. It wasn't fear that caused the tremor, not yet. It was the growing realization that maybe, just maybe, he had seriously underestimated someone he should have left alone. But what Michael didn't know yet was that this phone call was only the first in a carefully orchestrated series. Keisha wasn't just attacking a TechCorp client. She was preparing a systematic exposé that would reveal years of technical negligence, decisions based on prejudice, and incompetence masquerading as authority. While Michael struggled to understand how a simple delivery girl had gained access to such detailed information about vulnerabilities that his own team hadn't detected, Keisha was 3 steps ahead, implementing the second phase of a plan that would turn his public humiliation into a lesson Michael Harrison would never forget. For a moment, when he saw the name Kay Williams on his computer screen, Michael felt a twinge of something that could have been recognition, or perhaps even regret. But anyone who knew the true nature of justice knew that some mistakes are too big to be corrected with simple apologies, and that sometimes the only language people like Michael understand is one spoken through consequences impossible to ignore. The following Monday, Michael Harrison arrived at the office to find his secretary pale-faced and with a stack of urgent messages on her desk. "Mr. Harrison, we need to talk," she said nervously. "We've had 12 contract cancellations in the last 24 hours. All citing the same reason: critical security flaws identified by an independent audit." Michael felt the floor drop out from under him. 12 contracts represented nearly 60% of TechCorp's annual revenue. What audit? Who authorized this? "No one authorized it, sir. A consultant offered free reviews to our customers and, well, they took him up on it." The phone rang. It was Richard Goldman, CEO of Dataflow Industries, one of the company's largest customers. "Michael, I'm canceling our contract immediately. This Kay Williams found vulnerabilities that you assured us didn't exist. Even worse, I've discovered that you've known about these flaws for months and didn't tell us." Richard, there must be a misunderstanding. The misunderstanding was trusting you. This consultant showed us system logs dating back 6 months. You have exposed us to catastrophic risks and lied about it. Michael hung up, his hands shaking. K. Williams had access to TechCorp's internal logs. How was that possible? The answer came in the form of an email. Jennifer Chun had sent a message to the entire company with the subject line, "Transparency and Integrity, a necessary conversation." Dear colleagues, as an employee of this company for 5 years, I feel compelled to share some information that affects our professional integrity. The email went on to detail how Michael had used his position to sabotage Keisha's career out of pure prejudice, including recording the meeting where he bragged about destroying her life. Keisha Williams identified a critical problem in our systems in seconds. Our response was to humiliate her and then ruin her livelihood. Meanwhile, the same vulnerabilities she pointed out have cost us millions in security breaches over the past few months. Within 15 minutes, the email had spread throughout the company. Within 30 minutes, it was on social media. Within an hour, every tech website in the city was covering the story. Michael burst into Jennifer's office. "You're fired. How dare you defame me like that?" "Actually," said a calm voice from the doorway, "she's protected by employment laws against discrimination. And you're in serious trouble." It was Keisha, accompanied by a lawyer and 2 journalists. She was carrying a laptop and a folder full of documents. "Surprise," she said with a serene smile. "I'm here to do that security audit you insisted I wasn't capable of doing." Michael choked. You can't be here." "Security. Call security." "I didn't break in," Keisha replied calmly. "I was officially hired by TechCorp's board of directors to conduct a full audit following revelations of systematic negligence. Apparently, when 12 major clients cancel contracts on the same day, shareholders start asking uncomfortable questions." The journalists turned on their cameras. One of them asked, "Mr. Harrison, is it true that you used your corporate influence to sabotage the career of a qualified black employee just because she corrected you publicly?" Michael looked around desperately. Jennifer was smiling discreetly, David Park had hidden in his office, and other employees were watching through the glass partitions. That's a misunderstanding," Michael stammered. Keisha opened her laptop. "I can show you exactly what I found on TechCorp systems. 23 critical vulnerabilities that should have been fixed months ago. Flaws that cost the company's customers at least $4 million in losses." The screen showed detailed reports, error codes, system logs, irrefutable evidence of technical negligence. "The interesting part," Keisha continued, "is that these flaws were easily identifiable. Any competent programmer would have spotted them during a basic routine review." Michael felt the blood drain from his face. "Our systems passed all the checks." "Your checks were superficial and incompetent," Keisha said, her voice remaining perfectly calm. "You prioritized speed of implementation over actual security. Exactly the kind of decision someone would make if they were more concerned with protecting their ego than doing their job properly." Keisha's lawyer spoke up, "Mr. Harrison, my client is considering lawsuits for defamation, intentional interference with contractual relations, and racial discrimination. The evidence is substantial." "And the customers affected by the technical negligence," added the second journalist, "are organizing a class action lawsuit against TechCorp. Estimated losses already exceed $8 million. Michael slumped in his chair. In less than a week, he had lost most of his clients, the trust of his team, and now faced lawsuits that could destroy not only his career but also his financial stability. "Why?" he asked, looking at Keisha with a mixture of despair and something that could have been belated recognition. "You could have just moved on." Keisha closed her laptop and looked him straight in the eye. "Because someone needed to show that competence has no color, social class, or origin. And because people like you only learn when the consequences are impossible to ignore." As she left the room, followed by the journalists and Jennifer, who had just resigned to join the consulting firm Keisha was founding, Michael remained alone in his office, finally understanding that he had underestimated much more than a simple delivery girl. He had underestimated the strength of someone who turned every act of discrimination into fuel for a revenge as elegant as it was devastating. 6 months later, Keisha Williams sat in her own office on the 21st floor of a corporate building, watching the city through panoramic windows. Her company, Secure Code Solutions, had grown from an idea born out of injustice to one of the most respected cybersecurity consulting firms in the country. "We have 17 new contracts this month," said Jennifer Chun, now the company's director of operations, entering the room with a stack of proposals. "3 of them are former TechCorp clients who came to us specifically after seeing our work." Keisha smiled, but it wasn't a smile of satisfaction at revenge. It was the smile of someone who had turned his pain into purpose, his humiliation into motivation to build something bigger than anyone could have imagined. "And how's our beloved former company doing?" Keisha asked, even though she already knew the answer. "Michael was fired last week. TechCorp has lost 80% of its corporate clients in the last 6 months. They're considering bankruptcy." Jennifer paused. "He's suing former clients for breach of contract, but no one is taking him seriously. I hear he's working as a freelance consultant, but no one trusts him," Keisha finished. "Interesting how reputation works, isn't it? It takes years to build and seconds to destroy." In fact, Michael Harrison had discovered the hard way that competence was not a matter of a degree or skin color. After being fired from TechCorp, he had desperately tried to rebuild his career, but Jennifer's recording of him admitting to sabotaging Keisha out of prejudice had gone viral in the tech community. Companies that had once fought over his services now avoided any association with his name. His former colleagues, who had once laughed at his prejudiced jokes, now pretended not to know him at professional events. David Park had even sent a public message distancing himself from Michael's discriminatory attitudes. "You know what the most ironic part is," said Helen, Keisha's mother, entering the office with a tray of coffee. Her health had improved dramatically since they were able to afford the best medical care available. "That man tried to destroy you because he thought you weren't worthy of being on his level. Now you're 3 levels above him." Keisha hugged her mother affectionately. "It wasn't about levels, Mom. It was about proving that talent has no color, social class, or origin. And that sometimes, when the system fails to protect us, we have to build our own justice." The phone rang. It was an invitation to speak at the National Technology Conference, the same event where Michael had been one of the keynote speakers for 5 years in a row. This time, he wasn't even on the guest list. "I'm going to accept," Keisha told Jennifer. "I want to talk about how real diversity in technology isn't just a matter of social inclusion, but of technical excellence. How many problems could be solved more quickly if companies stopped underestimating people based on appearances?" Meanwhile, across town, Michael opened yet another rejection letter for a job opening. His bank account was nearly empty, his luxury apartment had been sold to pay off legal debts, and he now lived in a small studio in the suburbs. For the first time in his life, Michael Harrison was experiencing what it meant to be judged not by his talent, but by his actions. And the consequences were far more devastating than anything he had done to Keisha. "You turned an attempt at humiliation into a show of strength," said Jennifer, watching Keisha review new client contracts. "That wasn't just revenge. It was justice." "The best revenge," Keisha replied, "is not destroying those who hurt you. It's building something so extraordinary that they realize exactly how small they were when they tried to diminish you." A year after that fateful day at TechCorp, Keisha had proven Michael right about one thing: there really was a natural hierarchy. But it wasn't based on skin color, social background, or where someone went to school. It was based on competence, integrity, and the courage to fight for justice when the world tries to silence you. Secure Code Solutions now employed 45 people, including many talented professionals who had been underestimated by traditional companies. Keisha had created not just a business, but a movement that proved that diversity and technical excellence went hand in hand. Michael Harrison tried to destroy a food delivery company because he couldn't accept that she was smarter than him. He ended up losing everything and unwittingly creating one of the most innovative technology companies in the country. Keisha learned that true victory isn't about making your enemies suffer. It's about achieving such extraordinary success that they realize they were always too small to understand your greatness. If this story of overcoming adversity and justice has inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that competence has no color and that sometimes the universe uses our greatest challenges to lead us to our greatest destiny. A black hotel maid answered a call in Dutch in front of a millionaire. The next day, he sent for her. Zoe's cell phone rang as she cleaned the floor of the luxurious lobby of the Grand Plaza Hotel. Normally, she would never answer during working hours, rule number 1 from Manager Richards, especially for cleaning staff. But she recognized the number. It was the university. After 6 unsuccessful attempts to get a scholarship for her master's program in linguistics, this call could change everything. "One moment," she whispered to herself, hiding behind an ornate marble column. That's when her life changed in seconds. "Zoe Johnson," she answered discreetly, hoping not to be noticed by the guests passing through the lobby. The voice on the other end spoke in perfect Dutch. It was Professor Van Houten from the University of Amsterdam. Zoe responded immediately in the same language, her impeccable pronunciation flowing naturally as they discussed details of her application for the international program. "Mijn motivatiebrief was te laat. Onmogelijk. Ik heb het 2 weken geleden verzonden," Zoe explained, concerned that her letter of motivation had supposedly not arrived on time. That was when she noticed the sudden silence around her. She looked up and saw Richard Coleman, the billionaire owner of the hotel chain, standing a few feet away, watching her with an undisguised look of surprise. Next to him was Manager Richards, her eyes wide with fury. Zoe swallowed hard. "I have to go. Ik bel je later terug," she said hurriedly in Dutch, hanging up the phone. "Johnson. In my office now." The manager's voice cut through the air. The walk to the small administrative office in the basement seemed endless. Zoe felt the stares of her colleagues, some pitying, others barely concealing their satisfaction. At 29, she was the only black woman in the cleaning department with a college degree, something that Manager Richards made a point of constantly forgetting. "You know the rules, Johnson. No phones during working hours, especially in common areas," Richards fired off as soon as she closed the door. "And talking in, what was that? French." "Dutch," Zoe corrected instinctively, regretting it immediately. "I don't care if it was Martian. What I care about is that Mr. Coleman, the owner of this hotel, saw a cleaning lady ignoring her duties to talk on the phone in the lobby." The injustice burned like acid. The white receptionists took personal calls regularly with no consequences. But Zoe knew what was going on. It was the same pattern as always. "I'm assigning you to the convention center bathrooms for the next 3 months. Maybe there you can practice as many languages as you want without embarrassing the hotel." Zoe felt her stomach sink. The convention center meant double cleaning shifts after corporate events, with no overtime. It was Richard's classic punishment for those who crossed the line. "You can go. And be thankful you're not being fired." That night was one of the longest. In her small apartment shared with 2 fellow nurses, Zoe cried silently, staring at her linguistics degree and international certificates framed on the peeling wall. 6 years of cleaning hotel rooms while trying to save for a master's degree, while sending out resumes that never received a response after in-person interviews. The next morning, she arrived early, determined to show professionalism despite the injustice. That's when the phone at the front desk rang. "Zoe Johnson?" Called Jennifer, the head receptionist. "Human Resources wants you. Right away." The HR department was on the top floor, next to the executive offices, uncharted territory for cleaning staff. In the elevator, she felt invisible as always, surrounded by executives discussing million-dollar mergers without even noticing her. "Johnson." Called the HR director as soon as she entered. "Please have a seat." Zoe sat stiffly, preparing for the worst. "Termination, most likely. Mr. Coleman has requested a meeting with you. Now." The owner's office was bigger than her entire apartment. Richard Coleman, at 45, was famous in the business world for turning bankrupt hotels into luxury properties. And now he was looking directly at her. "Dutch, French, Italian, and Mandarin, correct?" he asked bluntly, consulting an open folder on the desk. Zoe blinked, confused. "How did you?" "Your resume. I asked HR for it as soon as I heard you yesterday. Honors degree in linguistics from Georgetown, fluent in 6 languages, 2 of them Asian. And cleaning my hotel for 6 years." What Zoe didn't know was that this moment was no coincidence. What no one in that hotel suspected was that behind that phone call in Dutch was a much bigger story, an unlikely connection that would not only transform Zoe's life, but expose a system of discrimination that for years had kept extraordinary talent hidden behind brooms and cleaning products. If this story of prejudice in the workplace stirs your indignation, sign up to find out how a simple phone call in a foreign language would become the catalyst for a turnaround that not even the most powerful billionaire could have predicted. For a few seconds, the office was completely silent. Zoe stood still, her mind processing what she had just heard. Richard Coleman knew who she was, really knew her, and not just as the invisible woman in a cleaning uniform that everyone ignored in the hallways. 6 years, Coleman repeated, closing the file and crossing his arms. May I ask why a Georgetown-educated linguist is cleaning my bathrooms instead of working on international translations? Zoe took a deep breath. I sent 47 resumes to the International Relations Department of this hotel. All ignored. I tried for an internal transfer 12 times. Always denied. By whom? Manager Richards and Mr. Whitmore, Director of Operations. Coleman wrote down the names without batting an eyelid. Curious. Whitmore constantly complains about the lack of multilingual staff for our international clients. His eyes narrowed. Especially for Asian conferences. What Coleman didn't say was that he had noticed a disturbing pattern. 3 months earlier, he had hired a consulting firm to discreetly investigate why his East Coast hotels had alarming turnover rates among qualified non-white employees. Zoe, I'll be blunt. Tomorrow a trade conference with Dutch and Chinese business executives begins. I need someone who speaks both languages fluently and understands cultural nuances. And you want me to clean their rooms? Zoe asked, unable to hide her sarcasm. Coleman smiled briefly. I want you to be our international relations coordinator for the event. Temporarily. Salary $5,000 a week, starting today. Zoe almost dropped her purse. It was more than she earned in 3 months. Why me? There are hundreds of qualified candidates. Because I heard you speaking Dutch like a native. Because you have the qualifications I need. And because I suspect there's something very wrong going on in my company. An hour later, Zoe stepped into the elevator with a new badge and full access to the hotel systems. On her way to HR to finalize the paperwork, she ran into Manager Richards. The shock on the woman's face was priceless. Johnson? What are you doing on this floor without a uniform? Working, Ms. Richards. International Relations Coordinator, at the direct request of Mr. Coleman. Richards visibly paled. Impossible. You don't have the qualifications to. Georgetown, fluent in 6 languages, including Mandarin and Dutch, Zoe interrupted, maintaining a professional tone. My resume has been in the hotel's files for 6 years, along with my 12 transfer requests. As the manager stammered out explanations, Zoe continued on her way. In the HR department, she found an unexpected ally, Zoe Williams, a newly hired recruitment analyst who showed genuine enthusiasm. Zoe? Finally. I saw your file when I started 3 months ago and couldn't understand why someone with your qualifications was in housekeeping, Zoe confided as she arranged her transfer. I tried to talk to Whitmore, but he cut me off immediately. That afternoon, as she prepared for the conference in the VIP room, Zoe noticed something disturbing. The event documents contained incorrect and inappropriate translations in Mandarin, which could cause serious diplomatic misunderstandings with the Chinese executives. She quickly corrected the errors, redesigning the welcome materials. How did you know they were wrong? Asked Coleman, who had been silently observing her work from the doorway. The previous translation used terms that could be considered offensive in formal corporate Chinese, Zoe explained. Whoever did this knows the basics of the language, but not the cultural nuances. Coleman nodded thoughtfully. Whitmore assured me he hired the best translators. It cost a fortune. He hired someone without checking their credentials, Zoe corrected, pointing out a critical error in the translation of a partnership proposal. The next day, the conference began. Zoe glided among the international business executives with natural elegance, switching effortlessly between Dutch and Mandarin, mediating conversations and facilitating connections that would normally take days to establish. During a break, she was approached by Whitmore, the director of operations, a man who had never deigned to speak to her in 6 years. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Miss Johnson, I'm impressed. Richards clearly misjudged your potential. Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. It's impressive how my resume listing fluency in Mandarin was overlooked, especially when the hotel spent $50,000 on inadequate translation services for this conference. Whitmore's smile froze. There must be some misunderstanding. I received confirmation of receipt of every email over the last 6 years, Zoe interrupted calmly, including those alerting you to critical errors in the translations contracted for Asian events. What Zoe didn't mention was that Zoe had given her access to the translation contract records. The company belonged to Whitmore's niece, who had no proven experience in formal Mandarin but charged expert rates. Worse, all previous translations contained similar errors that could have cost millions in lost business. On the third day of the conference, something unexpected happened. One of the Dutch businessmen recognized Zoe. "Wait, aren't you the student who wrote that brilliant article on linguistic variation in international business? Published in the Journal of Applied Linguistics." Zoe confirmed, surprised to be recognized. "I've cited your work at 2 conferences." The man exclaimed, calling colleagues over to meet her. Coleman watched from afar, noticing how Whitmore seemed increasingly uncomfortable. What the director didn't realize was that while he smiled and talked, Zoe was weaving a web that would reveal not just isolated mistakes, but an entire system of institutionalized discrimination and corruption that had kept talents like her suppressed while inflated contracts were directed to unqualified people. What no one at the Grand Plaza Hotel realized was that the black cleaning lady who answered a call in Dutch wasn't there by accident. Behind that seemingly simple department transfer, a plan was unfolding that would not only change Zoe's life, but expose a system of discrimination that affected dozens of employees. The question was no longer whether she could prove what had happened, but how devastating the truth would be when it came to light. On the morning of the 4th day of the conference, the Grand Plaza Hotel was buzzing with energy. Zoe's initiative had generated preliminary contracts that exceeded all expectations. As she walked through the lobby, she noticed something disturbing. Whitmore was leading a young woman, clearly nervous, to the executive elevators. "Miss Whitmore, your Mandarin translation is adequate," he said in a controlled tone. "There's no need for concern." Zoe recognized the last name immediately. The young woman was carrying a folder marked Final Translation, Master Contract. A quick glance as she passed confirmed her suspicions. The same critical errors from before persisted in the text. "Mr. Coleman needs to see this," Zoe thought, hurrying to the CEO's office. Coleman was reviewing documents when she entered unannounced. "Zoe? What's going on?" "Whitmore is replacing my correct translations with flawed versions done by her niece," Zoe explained, showing him screenshots on her phone. "And I have proof that this has been going on for years." Coleman stood up abruptly. "Are you absolutely sure?" "I have everything documented. What's more, I found records of inflated payments to her translation company, 3 times above market rate, while qualified candidates like me were systematically rejected." As they spoke, Zoe from HR rushed in. "Mr. Coleman, sorry to interrupt, but I found something you need to see right away," she said, handing him a folder. "Hiring records for the last 5 years. Consistent pattern of rejecting qualified non-white candidates, especially women." Coleman flipped through the documents, his face hardening with each page. The outside investigation had detected something, but this is systematic. At that moment, Whitmore entered the office without knocking, interrupting the conversation. "Richard, the Dutch are ready to sign, but they're asking about some inconsistencies in the translations. Johnson must have mixed something up." The silence that followed was icy. Coleman walked slowly to the door and closed it. "Thomas, I'm seeing payment records for $50,000 for incompetent translations, while we have qualified employees cleaning bathrooms," Coleman said, her voice dangerously calm. "Any explanation?" Whitmore paled visibly. "I don't know what you're talking about. We hire the best." "Her niece, Thomas?" Coleman interrupted. "With 0 experience in formal Mandarin? She has a certification." "Fake," Zoe finished, placing a printed email on the table. "I just confirmed with Peking University. They never certified Ashley Whitmore." Whitmore shot Zoe a look of pure hatred. "You're nobody. A cleaning lady who thinks she can play with the big boys." "PhD in Applied Linguistics from Georgetown," Zoe corrected calmly. "With 6 international publications. All in the HR files you've lost repeatedly." "Thomas," Coleman interjected. "I've called an emergency board meeting in 30 minutes. By then, I want her resignation letter on my desk." "You can't be serious," Whitmore laughed nervously. "Because of this. Choose your next words with extreme care," Coleman warned. 2 hours later, the executive auditorium was packed. All managers, supervisors, and directors had been summoned urgently. In the front row, Dutch and Chinese business executives waited curiously. Richards, the cleaning manager, looked confused, sitting next to other department managers. Coleman took the stage, Zoe at his side. "Today we discovered a systematic scheme of discrimination and nepotism that has cost this company millions," he announced gravely. "For years, managers such as Thomas Whitmore and Sarah Richards have implemented unofficial policies that have harmed not only our employees but also our bottom line." A presentation began behind him, showing comparative charts of employee qualifications versus positions, hiring and rejection statistics by race and gender, and overpriced contracts with companies linked to managers' family members. "Ms. Johnson, whom some of you knew only as a cleaning lady, saved our company from a diplomatic and financial disaster this week," Coleman continued, "by correcting translations that would have cost millions in contractual misunderstandings." The Asian businessmen nodded in recognition, some applauding quietly. "As a result of this investigation, Thomas Whitmore has been terminated for cause," Coleman announced. "Sarah Richards is suspended while we complete our investigation into her involvement. And effective immediately, we are implementing a complete audit of all hiring and promotions over the past 5 years." The room fell into shocked silence. Richards, now pale, stared at the floor. "And finally," Coleman smiled slightly, "I am pleased to announce that Dr. Zoe Johnson is being named our new Global Director of Internal Communications, overseeing all of our multilingual operations." The auditorium erupted in applause, some hesitant, many enthusiastic, especially from the cleaning crew sitting in the back, who applauded with tears in their eyes. As she left the stage, Zoe noticed Whitmore being escorted out of the building by security guards, his face contorted into a mask of impotent rage. As he passed Zoe, he muttered, "You won't last a month." Zoe just smiled serenely. In the pocket of her newly acquired blazer was a recording device, the same one that had captured every threat and racist comment Whitmore had whispered over the past few days as he desperately tried to cover up his scheme. That night, in her new office overlooking the city, Zoe finally allowed herself to cry. They weren't tears of sadness, but of deep catharsis. 6 years of cleaning hallways while her potential was denied. 6 years of "your resume must have gotten lost, and maybe you're not a good cultural fit." She picked up the phone and called her mother, who had sacrificed everything to pay for her education. "I did it, Mom," she said simply, her voice breaking. What no one at the Grand Plaza Hotel could have predicted that day was that the real transformation was just beginning. While some executives were still digesting the shock of seeing old privileges crumble, others were already realizing the inevitable truth. True talent, when finally unleashed, not only corrects past injustices, but completely redefines the future. The fall of Whitmore and his discriminatory scheme was only the first chapter in a complete overhaul that would shake the foundations not only of that hotel, but of the entire American hotel industry. And it all started with a simple phone call in Dutch. 6 months had passed since that fateful day when Zoe answered a call in Dutch in the lobby of the Grand Plaza Hotel. What had once been an isolated case of personal justice had turned into a silent revolution in the American hotel industry. Zoe's office on the 32nd floor now overlooked all of Manhattan. A discreet plaque on the oak door read, "Dr. Zoe Johnson, Vice President of Diversity and International Relations." The salary was 5 figures. Monthly, not annual. But the real power lay beyond the title or financial compensation. "Restructuring committee assembled and waiting, Dr. Johnson," announced Zoe, now her executive assistant and close friend. "All regional managers are on the conference call." Zoe nodded, taking a deep breath before entering the conference room where Richard Coleman and the board of directors were waiting for her. It was the day of the final presentation of the Invisible Talents program, a personal initiative Zoe had developed to identify and promote qualified employees who were systematically overlooked throughout the hotel chain. "The results of the pilot program have exceeded all of our expectations," Zoe began, presenting the numbers on the screen. "In just 6 months, we identified 147 employees with skills in languages, finance, management, and technology who were in roles well below their capabilities, 83% of them Black, Latino, or from other minority groups. Coleman nodded approvingly. The program had been his first demand when accepting the promotion, not just fixing his individual situation, but changing the entire system. Most impressive, Zoe continued, is the financial impact. Outsourced translation costs are down 78%, international customer satisfaction is up 42%, and our diversity ratings are now at the top of the industry. All this while providing real opportunities to people who are already on our payroll. Across the country, Sarah Richards watched the conference broadcast from a small hotel in California. After an extensive investigation, she had escaped termination by accepting a demotion and transfer. Now she managed the laundry at a second-rate property, a daily humiliation for someone who had once rejected talent based on prejudice. The next expansion of the program will include an internal mentoring system, Zoe explained. Each promoted talent commits to identifying and supporting other employees with potential. Thomas Whitmore was not attending the conference. After his dismissal, no luxury hotel would hire him. Allegations of systematic discrimination and embezzlement had permanently tarnished his name in the industry. Rumor had it that he was now working as a night manager at a roadside motel in Arizona. His niece Ashley had had to return all her inflated payments, complete a professional ethics program, and was now studying Mandarin, ironically, with a scholarship created by the Coleman Foundation for Inclusive Language Education. In closing, Zoe said, turning directly to the camera that broadcast to all properties in the chain, I want to share something personal. She paused, letting the silence fill the room. When I was little, my mother worked as a maid in a hotel like this one. She had a college degree, but she never got a job in her field. She always told me, Zoe, no matter how much they try to make you feel invisible, your worth is not dependent on their recognition. Zoe took a deep breath, maintaining her composure. My mother passed away believing that some doors would never open for people like us. She never lived to see this moment. To see that her sacrifice was worth it. Across the room, several executives, many newly promoted through the program, wiped away tears discreetly. The true power of a company isn't how much it makes, but the potential it unleashes. For decades, the hospitality industry, like so many others, buried extraordinary talent under service uniforms, assuming that people of certain colors, accents, or backgrounds were only fit for invisible roles. Coleman stood up, applauding, followed by the entire room and hundreds of employees watching remotely. Later that day, Zoe received an envelope in her office. Inside was a postcard from Amsterdam and a letter from a University of Applied Linguistics offering her a position as a visiting professor. Professor Van Houten, who had made that fateful call in Dutch 6 months earlier, had followed her meteoric rise. Ironically, Zoe thought as she looked out the window at the city, I have Richards to thank for punishing me that day. If she had simply given me a warning, I might still be cleaning the same rooms, my degree gathering dust. The next day, Zoe officially launched a scholarship fund for hotel employees and their children, financed in part by her new salary. The first beneficiary, the daughter of her former cleaning colleague, who dreamed of studying hotel management. What began as a phone call in Dutch had sent ripples that now spread far beyond that hotel, far beyond that industry. The message was clear: talent exists everywhere. What is lacking are opportunities and recognition. True justice is not just punishing those who discriminate, but rebuilding entire systems so that prejudice has nowhere to hide. Zoe's sweetest revenge was not seeing her antagonists fall, but watching hundreds of people like her finally rise. If this story moved you and made you reflect on how silent prejudice can stifle extraordinary talent, leave your comment and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories about people who have turned injustice into platforms for real change. After all, the greatest lesson Zoe teaches us is that true greatness isn't about overcoming barriers alone, but about ensuring that doors remain open for everyone who comes after you. Black mail-order bride was rejected for her color, until everything changed when a millionaire farmer saw her as his perfect match. You're Amara Wilson? The man swallowed hard, his face turning pale as if he had seen a ghost in broad daylight. This isn't going to work. You didn't mention that you were black. Amara finished the sentence Harold Pierce couldn't bring himself to say, her heart sinking as she stood on the station platform, the delicate hat she had bought especially for this moment now looking like a ridiculous detail amid the humiliation. 3 weeks of travel. 6 months of passionate letters. A trunk full of hopes and the promise of a new beginning away from the discrimination of the big city. All of that crumbled in seconds the moment Harold finally laid eyes on her. In your letters, you wrote so well. I imagined, he stammered, taking a step back, the bouquet of flowers wilting visibly in his sweaty hand. Couldn't you have warned me? Amara took a deep breath, gathering every ounce of dignity she had left. Tell you what, exactly? That my skin is as dark as night, but my feelings are as real as yours? You never asked. Harold looked around nervously, noticing the curious glances of passengers and station employees. In the small town of Riverbrook, a well-dressed black woman was already attracting attention. A black woman being publicly rejected by a white man created an irresistible spectacle. You have to understand my position. The community here, my business, he muttered, taking another step back. I can pay for your ticket back. You seem educated, I'm sure you'll understand. Amara felt a chill run down her spine, not from sadness, but from a controlled anger that simmered silently. In his letters, Harold had written about the lonely heart of a 45-year-old widower who longed for companionship, understanding, and a new chance at love. At no point did he mention that this heart had a color preference. I spent all my savings to get here, she said, her voice steady despite her inner trembling. I have nowhere to go back to. Harold reached into his pocket and pulled out some crumpled bills. This should cover a place to stay for a few days until you work things out. That's when a deep voice cut through the tense air like thunder on a clear day. Is that your solution, Pierce? Throw money at the problem and hope it goes away, like it always does. A tall man appeared behind Harold, his piercing eyes fixed on the merchant who now seemed to shrink in size. He was dressed in simple but visibly expensive clothes, the kind of simplicity that only the truly wealthy can afford to display. His sun-tanned face betrayed a life spent outdoors, but his posture exuded unquestionable authority. This is none of your concern, Maxwell, Harold replied, but his voice betrayed his uncertainty. It becomes my concern when I watch a man I've known for 15 years behave like a coward. The man named Maxwell turned to Amara, his gaze softening slightly. Miss, allow me to introduce myself. Alexander Maxwell. I have a property just outside the city. Amara nodded stiffly, suspicious. From experience, she knew that kindness from strangers often came with a hidden price. If I may be so bold, Alexander continued, I offer you lodging at my home until you decide your next course of action. We have guest rooms that are rarely used, and my housekeeper would be delighted to have company. Harold visibly choked on the offer. Maxwell, you can't be serious. What will people say? Alexander smiled, a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. The same people who do business with me every day? The same people who depend on my land for their livelihood? I'm curious to hear what they would say. Harold paled even more, understanding the implied message. Alexander Maxwell wasn't just a farmer, he was the farmer, owner of half the productive land in the region. What no one at that station could guess was that while Amara wavered between wounded pride and practical necessity, she carried with her not only a trunk of clothes, but also a secret that would forever change the balance of power in that small community. A secret that would make Harold Pierce bitterly regret the day he decided that skin color determined a person's worth. If this story of prejudice and dignity touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a humiliating rejection would become the catalyst for a turnaround that no one would ever forget. The Maxwell estate was not just a farm on the outskirts, as its owner had modestly described it. It was a stately Victorian mansion surrounded by acres of thriving plantations and lush pastures where thoroughbred horses grazed peacefully. As Alexander's carriage passed through the ornate gates, Amara felt simultaneously impressed and suspicious. People here aren't used to differences, Alexander explained as he pointed to the main house. Riverbrook was founded by traditional families who remain conveniently stuck in the past. Harold Pierce is just a symptom of a deeper disease. The housekeeper, Mrs. Foster, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a stiff posture, greeted Amara with professional courtesy. If she was surprised by the presence of a black guest, she didn't show it. "I've prepared the blue room, the one with the best view of the garden," she said, leading Amara through hallways decorated with priceless paintings and antiques. At dinner that evening, served in the imposing dining room, Alexander explained his history. The son of a banker from the North and a teacher who had embraced abolitionist causes, he had inherited not only a fortune but also strict principles about equality. When he moved to Riverbrook 15 years earlier, he had been regarded as eccentric, too rich to be ostracized, but too different to be completely accepted. "And what is your story, Miss Wilson?" he finally asked, after describing the businesses he ran. "Your letters must have impressed Harold for him to extend such a formal invitation." Amara hesitated, but something about Alexander's direct manner inspired confidence. "I'm a teacher. I was a teacher in Boston. I taught literature and history at a school for girls of color. When the school closed due to lack of funds, I realized I needed to start over somewhere else." What Amara didn't mention was the real reason behind her letters: the unexpected inheritance from her grandfather, a man who had spent his entire life as a butler for a wealthy family. An inheritance that included not only carefully saved gold coins, but also ancient documents that could change the fate of certain lands in the Riverbrook region. Documents she had hidden in a false bottom of her trunk. In the days that followed, Alexander gave Amara something rare: space to think. The mansion's library was a treasure trove of knowledge, and she immersed herself in books on local history, geography, and the laws of the region. When asked about her interests, she would simply smile and say she was broadening her horizons. A week after her arrival, news of her presence had spread throughout the small town. Visits to the Maxwell mansion suddenly increased. Curious neighbors, merchants' wives, even the local reverend, all suddenly remembering urgent matters to discuss with Alexander. "Just look at that," Alexander muttered during afternoon tea, after a particularly obvious delegation had left. "You've become the local attraction without even setting foot in town." Amara smiled bitterly. "I've always been an attraction, Mr. Maxwell. The difference is that now I have a porcelain teacup in my hand while I'm being watched." It was during one of these visits that Harold Pierce finally worked up the courage to show up. He arrived unannounced, hat in hand, his face a mask of false concern. "Maxwell," he greeted nervously. "I just came to see if Miss Wilson is comfortable." "Absolutely delighted," Alexander replied dryly. "Why don't you ask her personally?" Harold's face paled as Amara entered the room, wearing one of the elegant dresses Mrs. Foster had altered for her, no longer the exhausted, humiliated woman from the station, but a lady who moved with confidence and purpose. "Mr. Pierce," she greeted him coldly. "What an unexpected surprise." "Miss Wilson." Harold fiddled with his hat in his hands. "I came, that is, the community is concerned." "About my well-being? How kind of them." "About your situation." Harold glanced at Alexander. "It's not proper for an unmarried woman to remain in the residence of an unmarried man, especially when she's black." Alexander finished, his voice dangerously soft. "Go on, Pierce. I'm curious to hear how you intend to finish that sentence." Harold swallowed hard. "The church committee is considering options to help her return to Boston. A collection is being organized." Amara smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "How generous. But I'm afraid my plans have changed. I intend to remain in Riverbrook indefinitely." Harold's eyes widened. "That's impossible. You don't know anyone here, you have no job, no family." "I have a job," Amara replied calmly. "Mr. Maxwell has kindly offered me the position of librarian on his estate. Apparently, generations of Maxwells have accumulated books without ever organizing them properly." Harold looked at Alexander with a mixture of shock and barely contained anger. "You can't be serious." Alexander shrugged. "I've never been more serious. Miss Wilson is educated and competent. My library has never been in better hands." What Harold didn't realize, as he stumbled through increasingly feeble protests, was the true significance of that job. The Maxwell Library didn't just contain classics of literature, it also housed land records, legal documents, and the complete history of the region, including details that many traditional families would prefer to keep buried. When Harold finally left, defeated and furious, Alexander watched from the window as he hurried across the garden. "He'll try to make your life difficult," he remarked. "The little humiliation you inflicted on his ego today will not be forgotten." Amara nodded, a new determination shining in her eyes. "Let him try. While he's busy spreading petty rumors, I'll be digging much deeper than he ever imagined." What Harold Pierce couldn't know, what no one in Riverbrook could guess, was that the hours Amara spent in the library had a very specific purpose. Amid yellowed documents and dusty records, she was beginning to piece together a puzzle that would reveal an uncomfortable truth. Riverbrook's traditional founding families, including the Pierces, had built their fortunes on land that did not rightfully belong to them. And while the local society was abuzz with rumors about the woman of color staying at the Maxwell mansion, Amara was quietly setting the stage for a revelation that would shake the community to its very core. 2 weeks later, the small hall of Riverbrook's town hall was overflowing. An emergency call had brought together the founding families, local merchants, and farmers from across the region. At the center of the commotion, Harold Pierce gestured wildly, his face red with indignation. "It's an outrage. Maxwell is openly defying our traditions by keeping that woman on his property. Decent families are concerned about rumors of inappropriate behavior." As murmurs of agreement rippled through the room, the doors swung open. Alexander Maxwell entered calmly, followed by Amara Wilson, who walked with the dignity of a queen. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. "I appreciate the invitation," Alexander said, his voice firm, reaching every corner of the hall. "Although I must correct a misunderstanding. Miss Wilson is not here as my guest, but as the legal representative of a matter that deeply concerns all of you." Harold laughed nervously. "Legal representative? A woman of color with no education or authority? Maxwell, have you completely lost your mind?" Amara opened her briefcase methodically. "Actually, Mr. Pierce, in addition to being a certified teacher, I have legal power of attorney as a direct descendant of Joseph Freeman." The name struck like lightning in the silent hall. The older faces paled visibly. "Joseph Freeman doesn't exist," Harold retorted quickly. "He's an urban legend." "Curious," Amara replied, removing yellow documents from her briefcase. "Because I have here the original deed signed by the governor in 1866, granting Joseph Freeman, my great-grandfather and a man freed after the Civil War, the land that today constitutes approximately 60% of Riverbrook, including your store, Mr. Pierce." Judge Thornton adjusted his glasses to examine the documents Amara now presented. This looks authentic." "It's a forgery," Harold shouted, but his voice trembled. "The supporting records are here," Amara continued, unperturbed, "including the account of how Joseph Freeman was forced to flee after attempted lynchings in 1870, and how the founding families divided his land among themselves, forming what they called the Riverbrook Property Committee." Alexander then spoke. "The Maxwell Library keeps copies of all land records in the region. Curious how the specific 1870 to 1872 session was missing, until Miss Wilson found cross-references in other documents." Reverend Miller, an elderly man, bowed his head. "My father mentioned that story. He said it was a sin buried deep." "We're not here to punish the descendants for the sins of their ancestors," Amara declared. "I'm proposing a deal. The creation of a community foundation that benefits all citizens of Riverbrook, especially for education and affordable housing." Harold Pierce laughed nervously. "That's absurd. No one will believe this charade." That was when Attorney Jeffries, a respected three-state lawyer, entered the hall. "The documents have been verified by the State Historical Records Commission. They are authentic. And I am pleased to inform you that the lawsuit has been formally filed." The hall erupted in raised voices. Amid the confusion, Harold lunged furiously toward Amara. "You planned this from the beginning," he hissed. "That's what you were hiding in your letters." Amara remained calm. "No, Mr. Pierce. In the letters, I was just a lonely woman seeking companionship. It was your immediate rejection of me when you saw me that made me realize what kind of man you really were. The kind of man who would judge my great-grandfather for the same reason you judged me, solely because of the color of our skin." "You're going to ruin us," he muttered, pale. "No," she replied softly. "I'm going to right a historical wrong, in the fairest way possible for everyone. The difference between us, Mr. Pierce, is that I've faced discrimination my entire life, and yet I don't wish anyone to lose their home, not even you." As Harold Pierce collapsed into a chair, defeated, the city council withdrew to deliberate on Amara's proposal. Alexander approached her, admiration evident in his gaze. "You could have demanded everything," he said softly. "And made myself just like those who stole from my great-grandfather," she replied. "Justice isn't revenge, Alexander. It's restoration." What no one in that room could imagine as they watched the woman they had rejected and underestimated was that the true transformation of Riverbrook was just beginning. The message that would echo through the corridors of power for generations to come would not be about a woman who came to destroy, but about one who, even when wounded, chose to rebuild with dignity and vision. And while Harold Pierce faced the ruin of his reputation, Amara Wilson and Alexander Maxwell exchanged a look that held promises far beyond land and documents. A look that spoke of a future where belonging would no longer be a matter of color, but of character. 6 months after that historic meeting at City Hall, Riverbrook had been transformed. The Freeman Foundation, established with funds recovered from historical injustice, was already funding scholarships for disadvantaged youth and community improvement projects. At the center of this transformation was Amara, not as a vengeful figure, but as a visionary who saw beyond the pain. Harold Pierce's former store now housed Riverbrook's first public library, ironically, a place where forgotten stories could finally be told. Harold himself had left town weeks after the revelation, selling his properties for a fraction of their value and leaving without saying goodbye. Rumor had it that he was working as a clerk in a neighboring town, his pride as diminished as his bank account. "You could have destroyed him completely," Alexander remarked one fall afternoon as they strolled through the gardens of her estate, now partially converted into a cultural center. "Most people would have demanded every last penny." Amara smiled, watching children playing on lawns that had once been the exclusive territory of the elite. "Revenge would have given me satisfaction for a day. This," she gestured to the space around her, "will give us satisfaction for generations." News of the Freeman heiress had spread beyond Riverbrook, attracting journalists and historians interested in documenting similar cases of historical land injustice. Amara received invitations to speak at universities, sharing not only her personal story but the legal methodology she had used to re-establish the truth. During a celebratory dinner in the main hall of the Maxwell Mansion, now officially named Freeman Maxwell House, after the discreet marriage of its owners, Judge Thornton raised his glass in an unexpected toast. "To the woman who taught us that justice is not just a legal concept, but a daily practice," he declared, his voice breaking with genuine emotion. "When Amara arrived in our town, we thought we knew exactly who she was based solely on her appearance. What a humbling and necessary lesson we learned." At his side, Martha Webb, now principal of the new community school, nodded vigorously. "And to think it all started with a cruel rejection at the train station." Alexander took Amara's hand in his. "The best decision Harold Pierce ever made was to reject you," he murmured with a smile. "Although I doubt he would agree." In the old central square, where once only traditional families were celebrated, a new monument had been erected. Not a grand statue, but a simple bronze plaque telling the story of Joseph Freeman and how his unjustly taken land had finally returned to its purpose of serving the entire community. As night fell over Riverbrook, Amara watched the city lights from her new porch. She had arrived as a rejected stranger, a black woman deemed unfit to belong. Now she was not only accepted, but respected, not for bowing to the expectations of others, but for standing firm in her principles. When Alexander joined her with 2 cups of tea, Amara reflected on the journey that had brought them there. "You know what's ironic?" she said. "Harold rejected me because he couldn't imagine sharing his life with someone who didn't fit into his narrow worldview. In the end, that's exactly what destroyed him. While you thrived because of exactly what he despised, your strength, your history, your truth," Alexander added. The lesson Riverbrook learned, and one that would echo for generations, was simple but profound. When we judge someone based on superficial characteristics, we not only deny their humanity, we blind ourselves to the extraordinary value they could bring to our lives. And as Amara Wilson Maxwell watched the moon rise over the city that had once rejected her, she knew that true revenge had never been about punishing Harold Pierce. It was about building something so beautiful, fair, and lasting that his rejection would become nothing more than a footnote in the much larger story that was being written. If this story of overcoming prejudice and achieving justice with dignity touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories that remind us that our differences are not obstacles, but sources of strength that can transform entire communities.